Hey, it's Aaron, and today we're going to talk about something that I've been meaning to touch on for a little while now, and that's specifically on if laws actually stop crime. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of things today. It's a great big jam-packed video. Hopefully I can get it out in a reasonable amount of time. With all of that being said, let's get into it. So, do laws actually stop crime? Well, to really ask that question, we have to first ask what exactly is a law. And most people, if you ask them, they would probably tell you that a law is there to stop bad people from doing bad things. It's to stop criminals, right? But that's not actually what the word is defined as. The word is literally defined as a system of rules that regulate the actions of people in a community. No mention of good or bad in any part of that statement because it has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not something is good or bad, moral, immoral. It has to do with whether or not that action is allowed or isn't, if it's permissible or if it's not. And who gets to make those laws? Who gets to decide whether or not something is permissible and something isn't? Well, it's certainly not you. It's the people in control. It's the establishment. It's the society through the way of the government. Okay, so to actually determine whether or not laws can in fact stop crime, let's look at the top 3 reasons why criminals are convicted of crimes, why people are arrested in the United States. And it turns out that the top 3 reasons are theft, drug abuse, and drunk driving. Now, let's talk a little bit about drunk driving. Do drunk driving laws actually reduce the number of drunk drivers that are on the road? Well, arguably, you could say that it does. But what does it do in the meantime while it's punishing all of these people for drunk driving? Well, first of all, it disproportionately affects minorities, in that minorities are disproportionately pulled over for drunk driving offenses because they're usually the ones that are flagged by police most often. So drunk driving laws disproportionately affect minorities, making them more likely to be arrested or fined for some sort of drunk driving charge. If it does work at all, the way that it does work is by scaring the population. It's by using fear to instill this kind of idea in the heads of all of these people that might commit this crime, that if they do, there's going to be a bad place that they're going to be sent to for a very long time, and they shouldn't do it because they need to be terrified of that bad place. So if it does reduce the amount of crime, it does it in a way that promotes fear and basically insists that you comply with the law, because if you don't, they will punish you for it. Now, does that actually make criminals stop breaking the law? Well, arguably, I would say that it makes criminals more smart. It makes them try to find different ways so they can skirt around that law, because the incentive really isn't to stop doing the crime. The incentive is to find a way to do the crime whilst not getting caught. See, that's kind of the whole way this works. Laws are created, criminals find ways to get around those laws, and then the law enforcement finds ways to find those criminals, who then find ways to find out if those law enforcement are finding those criminals, so they can then find another way to get around it. It's basically the same thing as a lion chasing a zebra. The zebras are eventually going to get faster, and the lions are going to have to adapt and find a way to get faster themselves so they can catch the zebra. It's a never-ending cycle, because the incentive isn't to stop the crime, the incentive is to punish the criminal. Not only does it scare people into compliance, it also gives more authority and more power to the state. Is that something that we really want? Do we want to have the state have ultimate authority and control over every little aspect of our lives? Do we want to allow them to make draconian laws so they can analyze and scrutinize every one of your actions? I would imagine that's probably not the highest priority on many people's lists, but by adding more laws, it inevitably does that. It gives more power to the state and inevitably takes more of your power and more of your authority and more of your rights away. Millions, if not billions of dollars are either spent or lost on breathalyzer tests, and increasing the amount of patrol officers that are on duty, increasing the amount of jails that there are, increasing the fines and penalties that you have to pay if you're caught. And if you are caught and you go to jail, all of the time that you spent in that jail is lost wages and lost work, therefore taking your useful labor out of the economy entirely, forcing you into a jail cell where you're no longer a productive part of society. billions of dollars spent, millions of lives lost, and really, why are we doing any of this? To stop drunk drivers, of course, right? It's important to stop drunk drivers because if we don't, then there's going to be tons of people that are going to die thanks to drunk driving. Now, obviously, stopping drunk driving is an extremely important cause, and we should be doing that. But immediately jumping to the idea that somehow adding a bunch of laws is going to do that is kind of foolish because it doesn't really look into the reasons why drunk driving is actually happening. And if you look into it, we've actually had an incredible decrease in the amount of drunk drivers over the last few years since drunk driving became such a hot button issue. Now, is it because the laws were introduced? Or was it because of the intense propaganda campaign where we educated and taught people that drunk driving actually kills people and creates more harm? Really, it's the old question of if you take an aspirin and say a prayer, which one of those things cured your headache? I'm pretty sure that the laws themselves did a lot less good, while at the same time, all of that education really did increase the awareness and understanding that the people had when in regards to drunk driving. So if drunk driving has gone down, why is it still such a problem? It's obviously still one of the top 3 reasons why people are being arrested in the United States. So how do we fix this problem? Well, again, we have to look into the reasons why that's happening. And it turns out that the majority of drunk drivers happen to be in rural areas, places where there isn't sufficient infrastructure for them to take an alternative measure when they are drunk. There just isn't public transit. There isn't readily accessible taxi cabs. There aren't actual methods of getting these people from A to B, so they end up resorting to drunk driving. So instead of creating all of these laws, all of these rules, and inherently increasing the police state, the number one way that we would fix drunk driving is to disincentivize people from drunk driving by giving them alternative methods of getting home. Banning the booze obviously never helped. You can see that from Prohibition. Banning booze only ever makes things much, much worse. And clearly we can see that adding all of these extra draconian laws onto drunk driving doesn't actually fix the problem. It just makes it more difficult and makes criminals more clever. The way to fix that problem is to give people public transportation, is to actually increase the methods in which people can use to get safely from point A to point B. It's not a hard thing to imagine, but obviously that's not where the priorities lie. That's not where we've decided to spend our money. We've decided instead to spend our money on law enforcement and on draconian laws and on jails and on the prison industrial complex in general. It's a giant industry that thrives off of making sure that everything you do is illegal. So obviously, making sure that we uphold that system, the system that's paying all of these politicians and all of these people that make those laws, is of the utmost importance. And your actual safety and your rights and everything else are not even really on the radar. So, with that being said, we pretty much can cross drunk driving right off the list as far as reasons why we have laws to prevent them. Yes, the laws do reduce those crimes, but they can be reduced in a much more efficient and much more equitable way that doesn't increase the police state and doesn't decrease our rights by actually implementing something that would cost less and would actually help people. A public transportation system in rural areas. An easy solution to a seemingly impossible problem. And next on the list, we're going to talk about drug abuse. Now, drug abuse is, again, one of the top 3 reasons why people are incarcerated in the United States. But why exactly is that? Well, let's look at some of the numbers. It turns out from 1999 to 2017, over 700,000 people have died from drug overdoses. And to make things even more disturbing, in 2017 alone, there was over 70,000 deaths from drug overdoses. 130 Americans die every single day because of the opioid crisis. Now, I got all of those numbers from the CDC Injury Prevention and Control website. Now, I ask you, were all of those people that died, were they the scum of the earth? Were they the worst possible people on the face of the planet that they actually just deserved to have those sorts of things happen to them? They're just the dregs of society, drug addicts, the worst possible scum, you would think, right? Well, it turns out that 68% of those people were addicted to prescription drugs. That means that 68% of those deaths happened because they were legally given drugs from a pharmaceutical company through a doctor. The majority of drug abuse charges, and in fact overdoses, happen on account of the legal drug industry. And this happens because doctors are incentivized by drug companies through their lobbyists to constantly prescribe drugs instead of actually funding research to fix problems. It makes a lot more money to give people pills than it does to actually research how to fix their problems. And that's why we have so many people on long-term care that are given long-term opioid treatments that inevitably lead them to being addicted to those drugs. And that is one of the number one reasons why people right now are dying in such large numbers every single day thanks to this opioid crisis. The for-profit pharmaceutical companies and the for-profit healthcare industry is a multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar a year industry, and they make profit off of giving you drugs. They're no better than any street dealer. In fact, they're much, much worse because they have actual statistical problems where 68% of all of the people that are addicted to drugs are addicted to legal opioids. They are the drug pushers. They're the ones that are causing all of this problem. So instead of funding research or regulating the healthcare industry or the pharmaceutical industry and forcing them to actually do things that save lives, we've allowed them to become the world's largest drug pushers, creating the world's largest drug epidemic ever seen in modern history. And the way to solve this isn't by criminalizing a bunch of drug users who are inevitably doing those drugs because the system put them in a position where they were forced to. We should be actually tackling the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry and finding out ways to fix that. And a great way to fix that is by not having a for-profit pharmaceutical or healthcare industry. If these people aren't allowed to make money off of giving people care, then they're not going to try to find the easiest way to make money with giving people the least amount of care. You see, we have completely different priorities, being a patient or a worker, and being a business executive or a pharmaceutical industry magnate. Our priorities are completely different. We want to have the best possible healthcare for the least cost, and the healthcare industry magnate wants you to have the most expensive healthcare with the least amount of investment for them. Inevitably, we have an irreconcilable class conflict, if you will. And with that, it ends up creating serious problems where people's health is 100% related to their bank account, leading to 70,000 people dying in a single year in 2017 because of drug overdoses related to the pharmaceutical company, while the exuberantly rich get to have the health care that they actually need, because they can actually afford it. Okay, so we've talked about drunk driving and how that can actually be solved with public transit and not through laws. We've talked about drug abuse and how that can be solved by not having a for-profit healthcare industry instead of more laws. And now we're going to talk about the number one reason why people are arrested in the United States, and that is larceny or theft. Now, the number one type of theft in the United States is larceny, with a 5.2 million cases every single year, with most of those being cars. Now, again, obviously, these thieves, these people running around stealing all this stuff, they're clearly the worst people on the face of the earth, right? They're going around stealing cars and joyriding and doing this shit because they want to, because it's fun, right? Well, 5.2 million cases a year doesn't really sound to me like there's an epidemic of joyriders going around stealing cars for the lulz. It's not like the entire United States is a great big Fast and Furious movie. It's actually got a lot more to do with economics than people's personal desire to go fast. Now, the number one reason why people steal, and why people steal cars specifically, is because they're too poor to afford anything else. Stealing happens to be a very fast, very efficient way to get a bunch of money extremely quickly. A lot of people know that. In fact, millionaires and billionaires know that because they steal from you every single day. They've found out that theft is the number one way that they can get paid the fastest. So obviously, criminals, even street criminals, the lower kind of criminal, not anywhere near as bad as the white-collar criminal, but street criminals have realized this as well, and they've decided that when given the decision between starving or not being able to pay their rent or not being able to feed their children, they would instead steal some things so they could then get enough money so they wouldn't die. The vast majority of thefts that happen in the United States happen on economic grounds and not because somebody happens to be just a bad apple and they just wanted to commit a crime because they're bad people. Crimes happen for reasons, and they don't just happen out of nowhere. Yes, there are going to be a few people that go joyriding, but again, it's not an epidemic of joyriders. We in fact do know that there is an epidemic in regards to the amount of money that people actually have in their bank accounts. Right now, an average American has, or at least the last time I checked, had about $500 in case of an emergency in their bank account. Most of them wouldn't be able to survive a $1,000 emergency, and that means anything from breaking a toe to getting into a minor fender bender. They wouldn't be able to survive financially if any of those things happened to them. So obviously, a lot of people end up resorting to crime, specifically in this case theft, because if they don't, then they won't get paid. And you can say most of these people could just go out and get another job, get a second or third or fourth or sometimes fifth job. But at this point, it's starting to kind of sound like none of these people have any time to do regular things like sleep or eat. And not to mention, in this economy, specifically when the entire thing has just literally fallen through the floor and shit the bed, there aren't really any more jobs to be had. So, of course, you're going to see the rate of thefts and the rate of drug abuse all increase because people don't have any other choice. People are going to be stealing because they don't have any money. They're going to be using drugs because they're depressed and have nowhere else to go, and it's going to create more problems. And the way to fix that isn't by punishing those people. It's to fix their economic standards. It's to actually elevate them economically to a position where they don't need to steal and they don't need to do drugs. If you notice, statistically, rich people don't go around stealing cars because they have enough cars already. Now, before I go, I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I usually do in these videos, and I'm going to leave a link in the description box below to a book, and I really implore every single one of you to check it out. And in that book, one of the best quotes that I found specifically for this topic went something a little bit like this. Passing laws reduces crime, says the politician. But if that were true, if that was actually the case, then you would think that the more laws passed, the better. In fact, once you've passed enough laws, you would completely abolish crime. But why are you smiling? Because you know that's nonsense. At least, that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out all of the links, specifically that book, in the description box below. Hit the little like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit that little bell so you actually get notifications when I release a video. They're not going to tell you when I release a video, and they are unsubscribing people every single day, so make sure that you're still subscribed. And thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.